First recording.
All right, great. All right, welcome everyone. We're still waiting on a number of fellows, so we'll give this a moment before we get going. But welcome to our Track Foundation discussion section. And today's music is from Hidayah from Djibouti, and you can read a short description of it in the chat here. The song is called Unite by Djiboutiano. So this should set a nice tone for us in thinking about unity and leadership as we move into our discussion today.
Megan, did you want to put the questions in the chat?
I will. I want to wait till everyone gets here because
Okay.
otherwise folks who come in won't see the chat. So I want to wait till
that makes sense.
Session. That's one of the more annoying things about Zoom, that people having to share things in the chat. And welcome, Sir Fred. I saw you just came in. We're enjoying some music from Djibouti today. Unite.
What's the title of the music? Is it in the
song
chat?
is called Unite.
Unite.
Unite. I'll share the description in the chat again. And as usual, I'll include the playlist at the end of the week in our discussion board and our email. So if folks want to jam out to this more, you'll be able to.
Cool.
Guys, we'll get started now. We're still waiting on several people, but that's okay. In the interest of time, we'll get going. So welcome everyone to our discussion forum about the ethical leadership recorded session, part of your Track Foundation. Hopefully you feel that the BSU team was the best of all of the Track Foundation sessions. We had a wonderful panel discussion. So we're going to begin today with just a sort of brief summary of key themes from the panel discussion to sort of orient ourselves before we move into a more detailed interactive discussion about the questions with which we closed that panel. So I closed the panel, as you may remember, with 3 questions, one inspired by each of the presentations. You'll have the chance in our discussion forum today to join a breakout room that talks about one of those 3 questions. So you'll have some time to speak with the panelist in more detail. Those questions I will now share in the chat. So breakout room 1 will be Wendy's group. You'll be exploring a question inspired by her discussion of how leaders grapple with multiple competing obligations, and you'll be thinking about in your own experience what the most challenging ethical dilemma in leadership you've faced, and how you've responded to this dilemma. So that first breakout group will be a pretty thorny discussion of your experiences and kind of sharing some best practices and tips moving forward. The second session, which will be facilitated by Mike Krasanik, will get into more of a debate, really, hopefully. Will be inspired by his discussion of the challenges of perfecting democratic institutions and governance. And you'll be formulating an argument about, in your perspective, how much imperfection in a democratic system is tolerable and sustainable. Can a limited democracy be a possible transition to a full democracy? That is a rather provocative question that I think will generate a lot of discussion. And then the third group will be meeting with Dr. Gabriel Solomon based on his presentation, and you'll be thinking about his discussion of community engagement. That'll be another opportunity for you to share some of your best practices and experiences in the past. In your research or in your own work, what have you found to be the most and least effective approaches to fostering community engagement in public service? So those will be our discussion questions. Before we move into breakout rooms though, again, we're going to give each of our panelists an opportunity to kind of review some of the highlights of their presentations and sort of set things up for the rest of the day. Also, we have another member of our core team who's with us here. Now that almost everybody has logged in, we'll introduce Dr. Jabar Alabaidi, who's the faculty director of the Minnick Institute and has been very involved in the behind the scenes planning for this program over the entirety of this past half year. Jabar, do you want to briefly say hello to the fellows before we move into our presentations?
Thank you. Yes, it's very, really special a day for me to be able to join you all. I'm here too, as Megan mentioned, to work with all of you, to support you, and also to answer questions that related to your program. And we are behind the scenes indeed, but we are with you in spirit and also in minds. Welcome to the program. Wish you the best.
You. And Jabar is also serving as a coach. So some of you may have met him in that capacity, and is a professor in our communications department here on campus. So he will be yet another really fantastic faculty resource and part of this community as we move forward. All right, and you guys also have not yet met Dr. Mike Rosanek live, so this will be an opportunity for you to do so in a moment. All right, so we'll go in order here. I just put the questions in the chat again for people who joined late. And Wendy, do you want to just take a moment to refresh us on your presentation?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. One of the main points of the presentation had to do with the dilemmas that we face ethically, and the challenge of having multiple and sometimes conflicting ethical standards or moral reasoning or ethical obligations that are put forward perhaps by a professional organization, by the law, by the expectation of loyalty to our own organization, fealty to our bosses, the obligation to care for our family and family members. And it's not uncommon for those obligations to conflict. And so the question is, how do we go about resolving that? And that's one of the most important questions that a public leader faces, because at the heart of the decision-making is the public interest. So how do we resolve that when there's a conflict between our various obligations? And one of the things that we talked about was three kinds of ways. We presented a triangle, three sorts of perspectives that we can bring to that ethical dilemma resolution. One has to do with our basic principles of justice, fairness, equity, and that's a deontological perspective. Another angle is that of the greatest good, and we often refer to that as teleological. That is, what are the consequences of various decisions that I could make? And then the third area is referred to as virtue or intuition, where you're running off not so much principles or rules or consequences, but on your own character and moral values. Many times when we're making ethical choices and ethical decisions, we're choosing among multiple goods. When we think of some of the codes that we have in religious codes, such as in Christianity, the 10 Commandments, right and wrong is fairly clear. Don't kill, don't lie, right? But many times in our leadership roles, we're choosing among multiple goods. And the last thing I would say, which I don't think I said before, which is a former boss of mine said, you know, the best way you can tell, the best test of the decisions that you make, and particularly ethical decisions, is number one, what would my favorite aunt have to say about that decision? And what happens if I were to read of that decision in the newspaper headlines? If you're okay with both of those, chances are you're making a good decision. So thank you. Look forward to talking with you about this more.
Thank you. We're having some connection difficulties with a number of fellows, so I'm dealing with in the chat here. But thank you so much, Wendy.
Sure.
We'll continue. Kemi is helping out on WhatsApp for people that are trying to connect. All right, so Mike, would you like to just share some of the sort of key highlights and takeaways from your presentation?
Thank you, Megan, and it's great to see all of you again today, and wish you well as we participate in this, I think, important exercise on these three questions. what I'm going to be talking about and what we're going to be talking and you're going to be talking about is the question of democracy in your country and democracy in sub-Saharan Africa. One of the things that is disturbing to me, and I think to many other people, is that democracy is taking a back seat in many countries. Authoritarianism and one-person rule has emerged as the most effective way to achieve national development, or to achieve order, or to respond to individual public policy issues and challenges. What that has meant is that the so-called traditional model of democracy, whether it is in the United States or in Great Britain or other European countries, emphasizes the importance of constitutions, the rule of law, fair elections, open participation of people in the political process, and generally a strong commitment to a Bill of Rights and opportunities for people to express themselves in whatever way they feel appropriate. What may be happening, and this is why this question talks about the imperfection of the democratic system and limited democracy, is that we're going to be talking about it, and you're going to be talking about it. To what extent is it important that in your country and in other countries in sub-Saharan Africa, that people begin to accept a compromise form of democracy, transitional democracy, if you want to call it, where there is incremental development of institutions, incremental adjustments to the power of the political and governmental leaders, whether there is perhaps the need to develop from the grassroots, from the individuals as in small towns and elections of mayors rather than national legislatures, and whether we need to develop institutional norms that are going to take some time to grab hold of in these countries. Civic education will be important. Civic engagement would be important in a transitional democracy. Again, this is quite often viewed as an imperfection and as making too many concessions, perhaps, to the existing elite control and authoritarian control. Of course, the third option would be democratic revolution, and that would be engaging in activities, violent and otherwise, protests and strikes and demonstrations and actions that would bring forth a democratic government, but at a very high cost, and perhaps not a very successful cost as well. So we're going to be looking primarily at that middle option there, which I've called transitional democracy, but it can be given a number of different names, that emphasizes the importance of to what extent individuals in your country and throughout the region are willing to accept some kind of compromises and some kind of incremental change and some kind of institution building that may take years in order to achieve success as the old regime begins to fade away and a new generation, your generation, begins to accent the importance of a new democratic society, but one that doesn't come about in an American fashion or a British fashion, but one that complements the existing situation, culture, and values of your country. But it needs to be emphasized that a transitional democracy does accept some setbacks and some restrictions and some long-term development of democratic governance that doesn't happen overnight or doesn't happen in the American model that doesn't seem to be working in many countries around the world. It may not even be working here in the United States as well. We can talk about that. So as we move forward here in our breakout rooms, I like you to think about to what extent you're willing to accept in you yourself and your country the imperfections and the limitations and the need for perhaps a slow growth towards democratic rule. So looking forward to talking with you in a couple minutes. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Mike. And now Jabril, if you want to share, I know you prepared a few slides. You should be enabled to share those slides.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, good day, fellows. How is everybody doing? Let me, there we go. All right. Everyone can see the slides well? Yes, it's not hidden. Good. So one of the things that was the question, the central question around my presentation was looking at community engagement. It is pretty obvious that leadership in any forms, in any capacity, is not going to work if the leader is unable to engage with its community. And we know this from research. Matter of fact, the latest research, I referenced it on there in 2020, started to talk about the process of leadership in community engagement. This part of leadership tended to be have a very emphasis in the School of Social Work, where I teach. In the social work program, particularly at the master's level, we have a leadership component that looks at how do professionals engage with communities. So I wanted to start by laying a foundation for you to sort of have a concept of what are we talking about when we're talking about what is community engagement and what is the leadership process connected to it. There are two major principles that drive that. The first one, as you can see on the screen, that the leadership process that involves people in economic, social, cultural, and political action that directly affect their lives. This is something that I'm inviting all of you as leaders to pay very close attention to. Because it's always a good idea, you have a good idea, the idea sounds good, looks good. You run off and create a nonprofit organization. And a lot of time, if you're not careful, and a lot of you have created nonprofit organization, you make sure that the nonprofit organization that you're creating and running to do some good involves people's economic, social, cultural, and political action that affect the direct lives of people. Because otherwise, they're not going to get engaged in what you're doing, and therefore success becomes very difficult. The second part of that is that the leadership need to involve the process of collaborating with groups of people who not only share the geographic proximity to where you live, but also who have the same interest in addressing the same issue for the well-being. So geographic proximity is not just enough. You can't just limit your organization to where you live and just geography. You also have to look at people who have the same interest in addressing the issue. They may live miles away, they may even live countries away, but it is absolutely important for you to involve these people because they become critical to your success. And this is sort of the two principles that guide how we start to engage people and what that engagement means. Let me go to my next slide. Now, the second question for you was that how does a leader perform community engagement? How do you actually do this? Because it sounds good, but how do you physically do this when you are on the ground as a leader doing this? We found from research that these are three major principles that is really, if you put them into action, you are actually doing leadership that engages community. The first one, as you can see, that your leadership have to be grounded in engaging community citizens as co-implementers. Citizens, when they're co-implementers of your program, well, you're engaging them in a very successful kind of a way. Involving citizens as co-designers, and also involving citizens as initiators. Now, these three things, making sure that the citizens are co-implementers, co-designers, and initiators will be absolutely critical to how you engage a community successfully. Sometimes these three things are a blind side for most leaders, particularly leaders who are running nonprofit small organizations. Because you thought about the idea, you wrote up the idea, you and a small group of friends created this nonprofit organization, you have your missions, your goals, you have your charter, you're ready to hit the ground running. And if you look at that whole process, from the time you came up with a good idea, till the time that your organization became officially recognized and started running, if you're not careful, most of that process you were doing, the citizens that you would like to help were not part of the core implementation. They were not part of the core design. They're not core designers. You and a small group of people designed this initiative. Now is the time when you're really now getting ready to launch your organization to actually think about, how do I involve citizens as core designers of this idea moving forward? How do I involve them as core initiators of how we do this? And how do I invite them to be core implementers of what happens here? If you do not go back and look at your mission and look at how you engage the citizen you wish to serve as core designers, core initiators, and core implementers, the path to success of your organization and leadership will be very difficult, because it's just not enough for you to, and a small group of people, to come up with a nonprofit organization and try to run it without engaging the citizens you're trying to help. And one of the challenges that happens is that when you invite citizens as core designers, they may point out to you that there are flaws in the very idea you spend months and years working on. And you have to be open-minded enough to say, oh my goodness, we didn't realize when we designed this nonprofit organization that we were going to do X. But when we invited the citizen to be core designers, they actually help us realize that we really need to do Y first before we get to X. So this is absolutely important in terms of how you actually do this. This is very concrete, it's not abstract, and it is doable. So you put these three goals in front of you and you work on them, and it's backed up by research. I'll give you, all the references are there. You can go and pull them out and write the articles that were done in that regard. Now, next, we will look at now what is required of a leader to be community engaged. And I'm pulling now from social science studies, particularly in social work. We use psychosocial self. And psychosocial self is a theory that came out of Erikson's work. And some of you may be familiar with Erikson's work is all around identity development and identity formation, how we as individuals and human beings develop our identities and have a good sense of who we are as people and how we live in the world and how we operate. In terms of applying this to leadership, this is the same thing that I teach in my graduate social work courses. So what is it required for a leader to be community engaged? The leader needs to understand its psychosocial self. What does that mean? I'm glad you asked. Because to understand your psychosocial self, you need to understand your self-concept, how you think about, evaluate, and perceive, as well as your own awareness of yourself. It is absolutely critical that for you to really pay attention to how you think about, evaluate, and perceive yourself, as well as your own awareness of yourself. What are some of the things that actually speak to you, that are meaningful to you, that are important to you? It is absolutely important for a leader to know thyself, if you will. Next, it is absolutely important for you to understand your self-image. How do you see yourself in terms of your social roles, the roles you play in the society that you're in? If your role, as you see it, is just a leader, not a member of the society, or your role seems to be as if you think you are the Messiah, you are going to solve all these problems, well, you need to think about that. As well as your social role, it's also critical for you to pay attention to your personality traits. What are your traits in terms of your strength, and your weaknesses. What do you do well? What don't you do well? Recognizing flaws and accepting that you as a leader you are also learning along with the citizen that you're trying to work with. It is absolutely important for you to pay attention to your self-esteem, the extent to which you accept, approve, and value yourself as a leader who is not perfect. And if you don't confront this, because there are aspects of you that are not perfect, you have to accept, approve, and value them as part of who you are as a leader. And as a result, matter of fact, your self-esteem will help you recognize and build a team around you of people who have strength where you have weaknesses, and people who can help you with things that you're not familiar with. Because you accept that I don't know about this, I'm not competent in this, all right. Now, when I'm building my team and I'm bringing citizens along, I'm bringing people who have those skill sets and those competencies to complement who I am. And finally, your ideal self. What would you like to be as a leader in terms of what we call your congruence and incongruence? Congruence means that what you would like to be yourself, how you see yourself, how you conceptualize yourself is congruent, means it's aligned to what you're doing. Sometimes how you see yourself, how you value yourself, and what you would like to be is incongruent. It's in conflict with the realities happening on the ground. So don't run away from your congruence and incongruence, because they help you be very clear about what your ideal self is as a leader. Ladies and gentlemen, I can just go on. Oh my God, I'm excited, but let me stop here.
Thank you.
So we'll say more about this in the breakout room. Thank you so much, Megan.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of my colleagues here. And we're glad that almost everyone has been able to join the meeting finally. I posted the discussion questions again in the chat since some folks had trouble connecting earlier. So again, we'll be moving into breakout rooms now in just a moment. And you'll be placed in a room with one of our 3 presenters from the recorded panel, Wendy, Mike, or Jabril. And in the breakout room, you'll be focusing on those questions as shared in the chat. If you lose track of those questions in the chat, your breakout room facilitator will remind you of them. All right, so, all right, I think Wing Kai has created the breakout room, so we should be rolling. Many people are hosting this meeting today. Okay, so you should get an invitation
Remember to record
join a room. Yes.
And when you're over there.
Yes.
Gabriel, you're in room 3.
Okay.
Please choose 3.
What?
Please choose room 3.
Okay. It didn't give me the prompt to go to room 3.
Yeah, go to breakout rooms and choose room 3.
Okay.
You're a host. Okay. Can the rest of you go into your room?
How do we go into our rooms?
Yeah, it should be automatic. Are you in the?
Okay.
I can assign you.
Okay.
Are you able to join?